From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Tonight, reporting from Washington.
Good evening. We begin tonight where we are, at the end of the Reagan administration, on the edge of the Bush era. And as this transition occurs, it doesn't take place with any greater ease anywhere else in the world. The two men involved are both warmly embraced by much of the nation. Our ABC News inaugural poll shows that President Reagan has the highest job rating of any outgoing president since Franklin Roosevelt. Mr. Bush arrives with the highest rate of approval he has ever had. Which brings us to our first report tonight on George Bush and taxes. Here in Washington today, the man who will write George Bush's first budget about a month from now was submitting himself to the confirmation process on Capitol Hill. ABC's Sheila Cast was there.
Halfway through Richard Darman's confirmation hearing to head the Office of Management and Budget, the duck rule had been cited so often some senators decided to dramatize it.
The duck test is, if it quacks, it's a tax.
It's a corollary to the old rule, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Darman told the Governmental Affairs Committee if the public sees something that looks like a tax, it's a tax, even if it's labeled something else. For example, Darman ruled out an increase in the federal excise tax on gasoline, even though it could be described as a highway user fee.
Virtually everything is a duck, and to mix metaphors, ducks are off the table. No new taxes.
Darman also seemed to rule out higher taxes on alcohol and cigarettes. He insisted that spending cuts alone could bring the deficit down by $13 to $30 billion to meet the targets of the Graham-Rudman law. If not, he said the Bush administration would not flinch from the law's automatic spending cuts.
It is a very strong pressure to negotiate a more reasonable budget. My unequivocal preference is for a negotiated settlement of a more reasonable budget.
Darman was aiming to strengthen his hand in budget negotiations by implying that he would not be as intent as his predecessors in protecting defense from deep automatic cuts. He called such cuts a silly way to budget, but said he and his boss, the president-elect, would choose that over a tax increase. Sheila Cast, ABC News, Washington.
Just one more note about taxes for now. In our inaugural polling, we found that 77% of those people we asked believe that President Bush will raise taxes. Well, while Richard Darman was taking what passed for heat today up on Capitol Hill, Mr. Bush himself and Mrs. Bush were having a whale of a time. Accompanied on some occasions by enough relatives to fill a Washington hotel, well, it's a small hotel, the man of the hour was out on the town. Here's ABC's Britt Hume.
Not everything goes perfectly, even in a $30 million inaugural celebration, but George Bush is clearly loving it all, though he says he's not entirely comfortable with the cost. Bush jokingly passed off Congresswoman Lynn Martin's fall as an attempt to upstage him, and then gave the student group just what they might have expected from the man who says he'll be the education president.
I do see a better educated America, an America that respects teachers and the noble role they fill in our society.
A different audience got a much less expected performance at a tribute today to Barbara Bush. She was introduced by Dan Quayle, who was moved to tears.
Each life she touches is a little bit better because she came into their lives.
Mrs. Bush changed the mood quickly as she poked fun at herself.
And speaking of glamour, I want you all to look at me very carefully. Please notice the hair, the makeup, designer clothes. I want you to watch me all week. And remember, you may never see it again.
Bush, meanwhile, spent much of today rehearsing tomorrow's address, which he hopes will at least equal last summer's acceptance speech. But while that was a partisan address, aides say this will be much kinder and gentler. Britt Hume, ABC News, Washington.
Well, no matter what they say, it can't be easy. For 8 years, Ronald and Nancy Reagan have always been the center of attention. And then suddenly, in the most peaceful way, the most powerful individual in the Western world hands it all over Here's Sam Donaldson.
On his last full day as president, Ronald Reagan tied up some loose ends. His staff let it be known that of all the prominent people who might benefit from a pardon, only one got it. George Steinbrenner, owner of the New York Yankees, who pled guilty to making illegal contributions to the 1972 campaigns of Richard Nixon and several Democratic lawmakers. Quietly, in the last day or so, Steinbrenner was granted a full pardon. In the East Room today, the president handed out something else, the Medal of Freedom, to outgoing U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Mike Mansfield, and to Secretary of State George Shultz. Gold medals, a fact which Mr. Reagan played off in talking about himself.
Now, tomorrow is a special day for me. I'm going to receive my gold watch.
The president said he was entitled to make a last speech, and typically he spoke about love of country and immigrants who come here seeking a new life.
They understand in a special way how glorious it is to be an American. They renew our pride and gratitude in the United States of America, the greatest, freest nation in the world, the last best hope of man on earth.
Tonight, the Reagans dine here with daughter Maureen and her husband. Tomorrow morning, they leave here for the last time. And at the stroke of noon, the last loose end is tied. The Reagan presidency becomes history. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, the White House.
There was an emotional farewell at the State Department today for the Secretary of State. George Shultz seemed genuinely surprised when he came down the stairs this afternoon to find many of the department's employees gathered to say goodbye. When we come back, the two sides of an inaugural Washington, the parties and the poverty. And later in the broadcast, fraud on the futures markets. Millions and millions are involved. And another arms initiative from the Soviets. Fewer nuclear weapons in Europe.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by the fun ships of Carnival Cruise Lines.
You've been watching me for years now. Don't you think it's time you join me on a Carnival cruise? Come on! More people are taking vacations on Carnival. Because when you take a Carnival cruise, all your shipboard fun's included in one terrific price. All your nighttime entertainment's included. All your food's included, too. Plus fantastic tropical ports of call. So on your next vacation, take a 3, 4, or 7-day cruise on Carnival, the most popular cruise line in the world.
Next time you get heartburn, consider yourself lucky, because now Rolaids comes in assorted fruit flavors, still calcium-rich, sodium-free, and as effective as ever. Assorted flavored Rolaids. Relief never tasted so good.
Probably don't really need to tell you that the inauguration of a new president is 1 part serious business and about 9 parts celebration. There is that big parade tomorrow, for example. We hope you'll join us. It's always fun. And there are the parties. Not everybody gets to go. Here's John Martin.
The party is in full swing. Dinners for the wealthy. Concerts for the common man and woman. Streets lined with limousines. Hotels sold out to the rich and anonymous. Ordinary Washingtonians aren't exactly dancing in the streets, but some are practicing inside for tomorrow night's inaugural balls.
Somehow the foxtrot strikes me as the Republican dance, and I'm not quite sure why.
How was your foxtrot?
Excellent. I'm a Democrat, however.
At a convention center, professional dancers are practicing a number for a big inaugural show. 1,000 performers on stage, televised live tonight. And Nell Carter, in case you can't hear her, is telling people the joint is jumping. The final preparations are almost complete. By cover of night, a replica of the president-elect's fighter bomber from World War II has been moved into position for the parade. And at the Capitol, workers have hoisted the bulletproof glass into place for the swearing-in and inaugural address. By the time it's over, we will have spent more than $30 million, most of it from private corporations. That raises inevitable questions of whether special interests are buying favors. But in the swirl of soirees, these questions get lost. By tomorrow night, the new tenants should be settled inside the White House after the most festive and costly inaugural in American history. John Martin, ABC News, Washington.
Some of the visitors here for the inauguration are complaining about the traffic jams. It's essentially out-of-town limousines lost on busy streets, not knowing where to go. And then there's this. What many of the visitors might not see is what people here sometimes call the other Washington. Here's Chris Wallace.
Inside Union Station last night, a lavish inaugural banquet. $1,500 for a dinner of crab and veal. While outside, activists for the homeless fed more than 400 people chili and rice. It was a graphic symbol of the sharp divisions here between the haves of official Washington and the have-nots of the city beyond the monuments. Nadine Witter has been representing the other Washington in the city council since 1975.
In the shadows of the Capitol, we have people sleeping in the gutters. We have people who without food. And I think that you can kind of associate it with what we read about and what we see in the third world.
That is no exaggeration. Washington has the highest infant mortality rate in the U.S., worse than many developing countries. Of those children who survive, 1 in 3 lives in poverty. And the nation's capital is also its murder capital. Drug wars pushing the homicide rate past Detroit's. Ronald Walters, who teaches political science at Howard University, sees a poor black majority living under a rich white power structure.
I think there is a kind of apartheid in Washington, D.C. On the one hand, you see whites in positions of real power and authority. And on the other hand, blacks only have the power of the city, which is very little power indeed.
Now, even that is under challenge. Mayor Marion Barry, once a symbol of emerging black power here, is being investigated for ties to a suspected drug dealer. His administration has been called corrupt and inefficient.
Polls show most blacks are unhappy with Barry, but in this city's racially polarized politics, many are reluctant to criticize one of their own. Concerned they may open the door for white interests, and for what many blacks here call the plan.
The plan is a secret agenda or a belief in a conspiracy that the white power structure in the city is about to wrest control of the political establishment from black people.
However unlikely that seems in a city now 70% black, it shows the deep alienation here. So deep that many blacks see George Bush's inauguration as almost irrelevant.
Are you going to go to the inauguration?
No, I'm going to go to work, actually, get some bills paid. I have a son that I take care of, and I can't do it going uptown.
At tomorrow's ceremonies, chances are there won't be any mention of the other Washington. But if the new president wants to see the worst of urban problems, all he has to do is step out his new front door and walk a few blocks. Chris Wallace, ABC News, Washington.
When we come back, we'll have the other news. Allegations of millions of dollars of fraud on commodities exchanges as we continue our broadcast from Washington.
A little exercise never hurts, and neither does eating right, especially when it's Sunsweet pitted prunes with yogurt. Rounder, plumper Sunsweet. So good tasting, and so good for you.
I don't know.
What's missing in these new special request soups from Campbell's?
I don't know.
Want to guess?
I don't know.
About a third of the salt.
That's what Campbell's soups are. Good.
Rich stain and tough polyurethane protection in one. Polyshade by Minwax. Get a beautiful finish in half the time. A finish to be proud of. Polyshades by Minwax.
In Home After Home, people are throwing out cleaners they don't need because all they need is Lysol Direct. Direct cleans everything without rinsing, so people are making room for one cleaner that cleans everything. Lysol Direct.
Introducing Total Raisin Bran. Other Raisin Brans have only 1/4 as much vitamin nutrition. And eating a Raisin Bran with only 1/4 the vitamin nutrition you could get is like having Mount Rushmore.
Hey.
With only one president. New Total Raisin Bran is the only Raisin Bran with 100% of 11 vitamins and minerals. Total nutrition has finally come to Raisin Bran.
There is word today of an investigation which could rival the big Wall Street insider trading scandal. The FBI in Chicago has been looking into charges involving multi-million-dollar fraud on the world's two largest commodities exchanges. Here's ABC's Stephen Ogg.
The Chicago Board of Trade and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where they trade contracts on everything from wheat and soybeans to lumber and U.S. Treasury bonds. And the pace is frantic, with a complex series of hand signals and lots of shouting. But for the past 2 years, some of that trading was being done by undercover FBI agents. They posed as traders and secretly taped conversations. Today's Chicago Tribune said as many as 50 to 100 traders, brokers, and commodity firm officials had been cheating customers out of millions of dollars. Here's how it was done. When a broker bought a contract for a customer, the customer was billed for more than the actual trading price. When customers sold contracts, they were paid less than the actual trading price. The brokers kept the difference for themselves. Exchange officials said they were surprised, but promised harsh punishment.
Which is expulsion, a fine which equals any profit we can detect, plus a major fine on top of that, and then throw them out of the industry completely.
For years, the government has allowed the exchanges to largely regulate themselves. So the FBI investigation may prove what some critics have been saying for years. The government has indeed left the foxes to guard the chicken coop. Stephen Ogg, ABC News, Washington.
Stephen will be back in a few minutes to talk about Bush and the economy. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was up less than half a point. The trading was heavy. Consumer prices rose 0.3% last month. For all of 1988, prices rose 4.4%. We have a report tonight which represents a real challenge for George Bush. Once again, the Soviets have taken the initiative in foreign policy. They've announced plans to reduce further their nuclear weapons in Europe. Here's ABC's Walter Rogers.
Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze announced the Kremlin is unilaterally withdrawing from Europe some of its short-range battlefield nuclear missiles not covered by the Reagan-Gorbachev INF agreement. Speaking in Vienna, Shevardnadze said the specifics of these Soviet force reductions will be published later this month. But he made it clear the only tactical missiles to be dismantled are those assigned to units which Mr. Gorbachev earlier announced were being withdrawn from Eastern Europe. Here in Moscow, Mr. Gorbachev himself has begun to leak more details of his defense cuts. Gorbachev announced a 14.2% cut in the Soviet military budget, plus a 12% reduction in total Soviet military manpower. The Soviet leader clearly is trying to convince America's allies he's serious about shifting his economy from a military to a civilian footing. Gorbachev seems equally determined to keep the disarmament momentum going until the new Bush administration gets up to negotiating speed. Walter Rogers, ABC News, Moscow.
The deposed president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, is apparently getting sicker. Doctors say Marcos suffered a collapsed lung today in the Honolulu hospital where he is being treated for pneumonia. He's said to be in guarded condition and back in intensive care. Overseas, in the Israeli-occupied territories today, another Palestinian teenager was killed and as many as 39 other Palestinians wounded in yet another escalation of the violence in the Palestinian revolt. In the last week alone, at least 12 Palestinians have been killed. When we continue our broadcast from Washington, a look at some of the domestic issues which will be high on Mr. Bush's American agenda.
Where's the burning feeling?
Here.
For that heartburn, nobody does as much as Extra Strength Malox Plus. Where are the gas pains?
Here.
For that gas and indigestion, nobody does as much as Extra Strength Malox Plus. Its doctor-recommended formula neutralizes more than any leading antacid, and it dissolves gas. Where does it hurt?
It doesn't, thanks to Malox Plus.
Ask your doctor about Extra Strength Malox Plus.
Send up a crow's foot. Give me an app check.
There's a place in the friendly skies where not everyone's so friendly.
Stop. Hold it. I need 3 hours minimum. Check it out.
Over 9,000 mechanics of United Airlines work here.
Give me a mini grinder.
They're picky, fussy, stubborn. But if you fly, they're the best friends you'll ever have. United, rededicated to giving you the service you deserve. Come fly the friendly skies.
You know, looking like you never get any older is not all it's cracked up to be. You don't get the respect you deserve for the amount of time you put in the business. You can't grow a decent mustache, and you have a tough time getting the 30% seniors discount at Quality, Comfort, or Clarion. Could drive a guy to drink.
Call 800-221-2222 to reserve a room with a seniors discount at Comfort. Also available at Quality and Clarion.
Do you love shrimp? Red Lobster's got it. Lots of shrimp at a great price. Don't miss it. The Shrimp Spectacular Platter, just $7.95. Shrimp 4 different ways, all on one plate. Crispy fried, spicy Cajun popcorn, zesty lemon pepper, and presenting our delicious new grilled shrimp. That's the Shrimp Spectacular Platter, just $7.95. Kids shrimp, $1.95. But hurry, or you'll miss it at Red Lobster. And for all your football parties, call for Party Platters to go, ready in just 1 hour.
As we said last night, while we're here in Washington for the inauguration, we're using our regular slot for the American agenda to concentrate on the Bush agenda. Last night, foreign policy and defense. Tonight, the home front. Tonight, we'll hear again from Brit Hume, who's going to cover the Bush presidency from the White House, from Stephen Ogg, who covers the economy, and Jim Wooten, who tries to keep his finger on the erratic pulse of Congress. Well, everyone says it. George Bush is hobbled by the federal deficit. And so we put it first to Brit Hume. Does the rhetoric of the campaign match up with the reality of governing?
If you had to boil the Bush campaign on domestic policy down to 2 phrases, it's not hard to figure out what they would be. First and foremost, this.
Read my lips.
No new taxes. And then this.
Because I mean it when I say I want a kinder and gentler nation.
Those phrases have entered the language, but even if they hadn't, the Democrats who run Congress would make sure George Bush didn't forget them because they don't think Bush can have both. The need to reduce the budget deficit means spending can only increase slightly each year. With bankrupt savings and loans to bail out and nuclear waste to clean up, there's not much room for kinder and gentler things like improving education, helping the homeless, and fighting the drug war. So, his critics think, Bush must break one promise or the other.
Well, Britt, you've covered this man more closely than most. Do you believe his lips, or deep in his heart, does he think he can pay for what he wants from existing revenue?
Well, the whole theory of what is called the flexible freeze is that there are going to be some more revenues next year, and if you hold spending at current levels, you're going to have some extra money to work with. So that's the idea. Whether or not there'll be enough extra money to go around, of course, is the question.
Okay, a quick reminder about the election. Those Americans who voted chose a Republican president. But for the first time in 28 years, the party which won the White House actually lost seats in the Congress. Democrats control both houses. And speaking of different agendas, Jim Wooten.
They aren't likely to have much of a honeymoon. The problem is that after big budget increases for defense and little or none for domestic programs, the Democrats are as determined to protect their priorities as Mr. Bush is to hold the line on taxes, and that poses an inevitable conflict. Senator Kennedy wants to raise the minimum wage. Senator Dodd wants to expand daycare, and even Mr. Bush wants to be an education and environmental president, all of which costs money that isn't there unless it's taken from other programs or finally from new revenues. They're on fairly good terms now, the new Congress and this new president, but probably not for long.
Jim, the Graham-Rudman automatic cuts kick in automatically if the president and Congress can't agree. Does either side have the upper hand here?
Well, the Republicans in Congress who don't want any new taxes are willing to fall back on that rather gleefully and say, okay, if we can't get anything settled, this is what happens. The automatic axe falls across the board on all spending.
And in order to bring the deficit down, at least according to George Bush's formula, as Brit Hume puts it, the economy must continue to grow. What chance of that? Stephen Ogg.
God bless you. The economy that faces President George Bush is a far cry from what Ronald Reagan faced 8 years ago. For one thing, we're in the 7th straight year of economic growth. Inflation, though rising, is still only about 1/3 of what it was 8 years ago. Interest rates, also rising, are about half what they were when Ronald Reagan took office. Unemployment's at a 14-year low, and many factories are running close to capacity. But the huge budget deficit, $155 billion last year, may be the biggest economic problem facing the president. What's more, President Bush faces a tough balancing act. On the one hand, he wants to keep the economy growing. On the other, he must prevent rising inflation and higher interest rates from pushing the economy into recession.
Stephen, the international financial markets have a way of expressing displeasure with politicians. Can George Bush control them?
No, George Bush cannot control the international markets. And the people I speak to say that he probably has a few months to do something to show that he's going to bring that deficit down, maybe by early summer. And if he doesn't, then the markets will show him what they think.
Finally, for each of you, a chance to win the office pool. When will there be revenue enhancement? Taxes by any other name, or will there not be? Stephen?
You know, it depends on how you define it. Just a few days ago, the U.S. Customs Service decided to redefine what a van is, a van or utility vehicle. And they decided they're trucks. So all of a sudden, all the imported vans are going to pay a 25% duty as opposed to 2.5% for cars. The importers say that's the first tax.
But by any other name, Jim?
My judgment is that it is highly possible that there will be no new taxes.
I think that's right. There'll be more of this kind of redefinition that Steve's talking about. And one more thing, Peter. This administration will pretend that it is willing to endure the Grand Rudman automatic cuts, and make no mistake about it, that would be a train wreck in government, rather than go Congress's way and raise taxes. Whether they were really willing to do that or not, I don't know. But that's the poker hand they're going to try to play.
Okay, thank you all very much. We'll have our final report in just a moment.
Is this any way to spend a weekend? Get away to Marriott's 2 for Breakfast weekend, where you can be alone, together, relax by the pool, or try our fitness room, dine and dance the night away. Through April 1st, just $59 to $89 per night, not per person, depending on location. A hearty breakfast for 2 is included. Marriott's 2 for Breakfast weekend from $59 to $89. Call 1-800-USA-WKND.
If you could taste time, the sun, fresh air, if you could taste pride, dedication, this is what it would taste like. Smucker's Low Sugar Spreads. Half the sugar, only 8 calories per teaspoon. All the tradition.
How fast does Dristan nasal spray start to work?
Faster than Dolly can pick up a $5 tip.
Dristan works fast to relieve nasal congestion, even sinus pressure. For relief,
faster than a frog on a hot rock.
Try Dristan nasal spray. It's faster than...
Remember this little number. It's just 150 calories, no fat, and it tastes fabulous. Plus, this little number is going to help me get into this little number.
Now you can win $50,000 instantly. See package for details.
Tonight on Nightline, at the core of the trouble in Miami is the kind of issue they usually talk about behind closed doors. Tonight, we'll try to bring the debate out into the open.
Just before we leave, an invitation to join us tomorrow at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It's a bicentennial presidential inauguration, 200 years ago that George Washington took the oath of office. From George to George, they're calling it. The parade, the swearing in, will be here throughout the day, beginning at 10. Until then, I'm Peter Jennings. Good night from Washington.